anything particularly spectacular. Now we go to line 3, we add 1 to n. Now when you add 1 to n, you do not change column E. Column E is a little slip of paper with the call number. Its only job to tell you where to find the item that it is referring to. So when you add 1 to n on line 3, you are not changing the reference itself, you're changing the item that it is referring to. In this case, it is referring to column C, and that's why on line 3, you are going to change the value that is in column C. Column C at this point has a value of 50. Now it becomes 51 because we are adding 1 to the value of that column. Are we doing okay so far?
Why don't we say 51 in column E2? I mean, I understand why it actually becomes 51 because there's reference to it.
Because column E is your call number. This is the little slip of paper with the call number of the book.
Okay.
When I tell you, go highlight page 20, the first line of page 20 of the book that has this call number, do you highlight the call number itself? No. Same thing here. I'm adding 1 to the item referred to by parameter n, so nothing happens to the reference itself, it happens to whatever it is referring to. Okay. Now I know this seems kind of tedious. Most of you already know what passing by reference is, and this is just really extra steps, and we have to play by all these rules. There's a reason why we do that, or there's a reason why I do that. It is because this actually illustrates how a processor do things internally when you run a program in just about any programming language. Okay, this is what happens when you program in C. This is what happens when you program in Perl, PHP, Visual Basic, C#. Name the language. If it has passing by reference versus passing by value, that's what it's going to do. Okay. Why do I care how a program actually executes?
You want to know what it is going to do.
But isn't it enough that I kind of have a feeling of what it's going to do? If your program works perfectly, maybe that's okay. But most programs do not work perfectly the first time, right? When a program has a bug, this is important. Yep.
I was going to say you want to know how it works so that you can know how to improve it.
Or when you have a bug, you understand why it happens. Okay? And I can show you in the next slide, a potential problem, when you have two parameters that are both passed by reference. Okay? So let's see. Let's go finish this one. I'm done with line 3. We go to line 4. Line 4 is the end of a subroutine. At the end of a subroutine, there are 2 things to do. One is to look up the return line number so we know where to continue execution. And the second thing to do is to deallocate everything that we allocated earlier for this invocation of the subroutine. Have we changed anything from what we talked about last time? Not a single thing. Okay, the only part that is unique is now we have a reference to a parameter instead of a variable that belongs to somebody else. On line 9, there's not much to do. This is also the end of a subroutine, so what we do is do the same thing. We look up the return line number. We know now that we have to continue execution at post, and then we deallocate the columns that we allocated for this invocation, and this is the end of this trace. Let me go ahead and save it first. Okay, I'll call this by val by ref because we first have a by val parameter and then we pass it by reference to something else, which probably gives you a clue of what the next program is going to do. By ref by val. Okay, we pass a parameter by ref first, and then we pass that in return by val, and then we see what will happen to it. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'll just make a new one. It's easy enough. What we are doing right... I just closed the one that I need. So basically what we are doing is we are looking at the combination of the 2 types of parameters as well as local variables. maybe we should do this first. Okay, this one is also important. It's going to be called by ref. In other words, I pass a parameter by ref to a subroutine. That subroutine also call that another subroutine and pass the same thing by reference again. Okay, so we'll go ahead and see what's going to happen in this case. Okay, once again we have add one. Okay, so this part does not change. We use exactly the same code as last time. And then we have relay, which is almost exactly the same except for this part. This time it is by rev x. And then we say invoke add one. Now this time I have to specify x double arrow n, because whenever you pass something by reference in this class, we have to switch to a bidirectional arrow to indicate whatever happens to n happens to x. Okay, that's why the arrow is important, because it tells you, whether it is a monodirectional way or unidirectional thing, or whether it's a bidirectional thing. And define that. Now this also brings up, another point about parameters, especially passing by reference. I will let you guys find out what the problem is. Invoke relay 50 double arrow x. Is there a problem?
Yeah, get two column numbers to the same thing.
No, that's not really the problem.
There's no column for 50?
Exactly. There's no column for the constant for the expression 50. At least not in this class. Okay? So this is something that should not happen in this class, because 50 as an expression is not a variable. It is not a variable, it is not a parameter, it is not anything that has a column associated with it. Now, if this is something that does not have a column associated with it, then what is x a reference of in this case? I cannot specify, right? So that's why in this class, in cisp300, this is something that should not happen. Whatever is on the left-hand side of the double-sided arrow of a pass by reference parameter has to be something that has a column associated with it. It can have its own column, it can refer to a column, but it has to have a way to define a column. 50 as a constant or an expression does not specify a column. Is that okay so far? Okay. So that means this won't work in this particular program, and I have to change it to something else. And just to make sure that we don't confuse the names, I'll just say that we have a global variable w, and we'll just pre-initialize w to a value of 5. Now everything is okay, because w being used outside of the definition of any subroutine is now a global variable. As a global variable, it has a column associated with it, and now x will become a reference to that particular column. Yep.
Okay, in line 11, we say you invoke relay, and you have w is by reference. The syntax of a program, would you just say w in the parameter list, or would you have to write by reference in the parameter list on the column function?
W is just a global variable. In this class, we can use global variables, without declaring that first. Now, but this means that we have a global variable in this program, which is bad, right? We don't want global variables. So there's a way to get rid of the global variable too. In fact, I should rename this file accordingly as well. So what I'm going to do now is to introduce the concept of the main subroutine. Okay? So here we have a subroutine called main. That's a strange name for a subroutine, don't you think? Just ask anyone who programs in C. And now we say there's a local thing called w. And then we can say invoke add one. W is now specified. Oops. Invoke relay. W is used now to specify parameter x. And define sub. And now the main part of the program only needs to do one thing: invoke the subroutine that has a name of main. And change the indentation first. Now this program has a number of significance. Okay, so I will discuss all those significances later. Right now, I will call this local by ref, because that's exactly how things are passed along. Yep.
You never gave a value to W.
Okay, thank you. I'll just be passing the unknown thing around. That would not be good. Okay, thank you. All right. So there are several things here that are important, especially for people who are moving on to cisp 360. In cisp 360, there is no such thing as having code that is outside of a subroutine. Okay? Now, when you move on to that class, that will be explained like in the first class. But I just want to point that out so that when you get into that class, you won't be surprised. When you get into cisp 360, there is no such thing as program code or pseudocode or C code that is outside of a subroutine. In other words, everything is inside a subroutine of some sort. Well, the tag that's going to be a problem because in this class, you start execution with the lines that are outside of the definition of a subroutine. Do you remember that? So what it means is in a C program, there's an implicit invoke main hidden somewhere. Okay? It is never spelled out, it is never visible, but every C program has an invoke main that you cannot see. The name main does not change. You have to use the name main, which means the main subroutine is the entry point of your code. Are we doing okay so far? Okay. By the time you get to a C class, you will probably understand this a little bit better. All I'm trying to say is, in a C program, this part is implicitly there. You cannot see it, which means from your perspective, that the entry point of your code is going to be a subroutine called main, okay, which is the first thing I want to illustrate here. The second thing that I want to illustrate is related to local and by ref and by ref. In other words, I have a local variable. I pass it by reference to a subroutine. But this subroutine in return also pass that by reference to another subroutine. So the question is, by the time I get to add one, do I have a reference to a column? Do I have a reference to a column directly? That is the question. Okay? So we'll go ahead and run this program and find out for sure. And we don't need a column for comments. We just need line number in this case. And this is my precondition. Isn't it nice without global variables? My precondition, there's nothing to say about the precondition anymore. Okay? And the first thing I will do is line 17, which is implicit in the C program. Okay? In the C program, the invoke main part is implicit. You don't get to see that part. Okay? So line 17 is calling main, which means I have to specify a return line number, as well as reserve the space for the local variable W. The return line number is posed because there are no additional lines after line 17. W being a local variable, what should I put here? A question mark, not nothing, okay? Nothing and a question mark are two different things. In this class, nothing means it maintains whatever value it had before. A question mark is explicitly saying that it has a value, we just don't know what it is. Then we can go into the subroutine main, start executing from the first line, which is line 13. Line 13 initializes W to 5, and then we go to line 14. Line 14 invokes another subroutine called relay, which means we have to reserve a column for the return line number. The invocation is on line 14. The return line number is going to be line 15.